I'm really struggling to record this video today, which is great for a video about perfectionism. Hi, my name is Kel and I'm a therapist and educator with a special interest in eating disorders. Come on in, take a seat, and if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe for bite-sized content across the mental health and eating disorder spectrum. In today's video, I'd like to focus on the topic of perfectionism in eating disorder recovery and care. I recently posted a video titled "What is Eating Disorder Recovery?" If you haven't already watched that video, I suggest you go see that one first, so I'll leave a link to that right here. In the comments section to that post, somebody shared a little of their personal experience of a time on their journey towards eating disorder recovery when they were experiencing a blip or relapse, and they felt that the professional they were working with treated them as if they failed because they were returning to some old eating disorder behaviours. Now, just in case you haven't yet watched that previous video, I want to let you know that unfortunately it is quite common to experience blips or relapses on the journey towards eating disorder recovery, and this is absolutely not an indication of the individual failing. The way that I like to frame this is that it's a learning opportunity. It's a chance for the individual affected, as well as me if I'm the professional working with them, to learn something about their experience that we can take forward in working towards their eating disorder recovery. I, of course, don't know what the full context was for the individual that left this comment, and I wouldn't like to pass judgment or thought on that even if I did. However, it does bring up what I think is an important topic and one I've heard discussed before. Kind of feels like a little bit of an uncomfortable topic to focus on, but I'm not going to shy away from the difficult topics. I'm going to take this as a learning opportunity. Given that we could interpret the situation that was offered in that comment in a number of ways, it might be helpful to start there in terms of thinking about what perhaps went wrong in that type of situation. It could be that the professional in question literally suggested or told the client explicitly that they felt that they were failing because they were relapsing to some old eating disorder behaviours. I hope that that isn't the case, but the chances are it probably has been somebody's experience at some point in time. Another explanation could be that the professional was trying to express concern about the client and communicated that poorly, and it came across in that kind of critical manner. Or it could be that the client in this scenario was feeling quite self-critical and negative about themselves because of the blip or relapse, and in that sense was primed to hear what the professional said in that negative way. Whatever the case, these give us the opportunity to think about that intersectionality between eating disorder recovery, perfectionism, and also professional language, and this does feel like an important topic. It's widely accepted that there is a large overlap between perfectionist kind of personality traits and the experience of an eating disorder. I'm actually not going to spend a huge amount of time in this video focusing on that element, so if you are interested in me making a video about how perfectionism might contribute to the development of an eating disorder, let me know about that in the comment section below and I can consider creating that video in the future. But just as a kind of caveat to this, perfectionism is the idea that a person feels they need to be or need to be seen to be perfect. And that might also come along with setting exceptionally high standards for oneself. This is typically wrapped up in a sense of low self-confidence or a sense of not being good enough, and could also be wrapped in some feelings of shame. It's important to recognise this because that gives some emotional context to some of the responses that we might be about to think about. As I move forward in this video, I'm going to try and break down how perfectionism might interrelate with the eating disorder recovery journey from the client's perspective, and then also in relation to more of the therapist's component of that. It doesn't quite separate that neatly, but that might make it a little bit clearer as to what I'm focusing on. So let's start with the client's experience and how perfectionism might impact the client's experience of eating disorder recovery. As a starting point, perfectionism might actually even prohibit or delay a person accessing care and support for their eating disorder. The reality is that we do live in a society that paints us a picture of what perfection should be, and there is a body image and confidence component to that, a significant component to that. And for example, in an individual affected by something like anorexia nervosa, they might be working towards complying with what they believe is a projection of perfection in terms of controlling their body, their food intake, and their emotions. In accessing care and treatment, there is probably some knowledge that the professionals and those supporting them are going to want them to work in the opposite direction. They're going to want them to work towards eating more and perhaps gaining weight on their eating disorder recovery journey. And this can create a huge amount of anxiety because we're being projected this image that leads the client, or has led in this instance the client, towards engaging in restrictive behaviours, and then we're painting a picture that requires them to do the exact opposite of the perfectionist patterns they've been engaging in. And to sit in that anxiety can be very challenging. One thing that it can create is a huge amount of procrastination in the beginning of the eating disorder recovery journey. So you might find yourself working with a client who expresses to you that they want to work towards eating disorder recovery and they want to challenge their eating disorder behaviours. However, in between therapy sessions, they find it really hard to put those practices into action. And that can be because they're overwhelmed with this rock and hard place of their drive towards perfection from the internal monologue of the eating disorder and their drive towards recovering from their eating disorder. And what we need to do in that setting as a professional is bring this into the conscious and bring this into the conversation. We need to help the client paint a picture of what direction they want to be working towards, what direction they want to be moving in, and give them some tools, and even just bringing it into awareness is part of giving them the tools to make an active choice to challenge their eating disorder behaviour and understand where that excessive anxiety is coming from. The flip side of this can also be that in some instances, those accessing eating disorder care and treatment bring the perfectionism into the actual treatment process, and that might mean initially that might look quite positive, and it might mean that they follow step by step exactly the rules, the plans, the ideas that they're given by the professionals that they're working with, be that OTs, dietitians, therapists, psychiatrists, and they might follow in a even ritualistic manner the steps that they've been given and work very clearly towards their eating disorder recovery. However, no two eating disorder recovery journeys look the same, so it's highly unlikely that a prescribed eating disorder journey process is going to work for every client, and in some respect we're therefore setting them up to fail. And how this sometimes plays out in this type of scenario is that these clients follow those steps in their eating disorder recovery process, and they seem to be steadily and confidently moving towards recovery and ultimately either end therapy or are discharged from eating disorder services, and unfortunately quite often become clients that might get referred to as revolving door. And that means that when they've exited the treatment program or they've stopped therapy, they quickly relapse into their eating disorder behaviours because it isn't their actual personal individual needs that have been helped in this eating disorder journey. They were simply perfectly following the plan that they were given, and that actually isn't helping them challenge their own internal beliefs and isn't going to be meeting all of their needs. In this sense, in a kind of backwards manner, the eating disorder recovery process can reinforce that black and white, all or nothing thinking. And this is a really unhelpful thing that can happen and that we need to be on our toes and looking out for. When it comes to the therapist's part of this equation, it can be almost nice to see a client following the plans towards the eating disorder recovery journey and seeing that steady improvement, even though we can recognize that we know that relapse and blips are commonplace and to be expected, and we might get overly invested or blindsided by that tendency to work towards the plan and work towards eating disorder recovery, and therefore we might overlook having those conversations that normalize blips and relapses and let clients know that we will be there on the days that they struggle. And again, for them this is important because we all experience struggles with our emotions and our mental health at times, and we can, by not bringing this into awareness and by just following this pattern in an almost overly positive way, be setting them up to fail in the future. So to this end, the focus really needs to be on learning on the eating disorder recovery journey, learning self-awareness, learning about one's emotions, and learning what's important to the client on their eating disorder recovery journey, in addition to those steps that might be part of perhaps the more medicalized process, that might be dietetics or medication, for example. I tend to think that this type of scenario can also be born out of our anxiety as professionals. Of course, we want our clients to recover from their eating disorder or whatever else it is that brings them to therapy or treatment for a mental health struggle. And when it comes to eating disorders, there is the acceptance that eating disorders have a high mortality rate. And so we might blindly want to get swept into this idea that this person is working the plan and they're working towards recovery and this is really positive, rather than confronting our own anxieties about how we feel about the potential mortality of living with an eating disorder. And I think it's really important that these topics are conversations that those of us working with eating disorders spend some time to have in supervision. It's certainly something that we focus on in the training programs that we offer for therapists working with clients with eating disorders, because it is challenging and it is uncomfortable, but it is also necessary to focus on these things if we're going to be clear and transparent and proactive and thoughtful in our support of clients in their recovery from their eating disorder journey. And I guess in that respect, it asks for something from us as well as it asks for something from our clients. One last thing that I wanted to pay comment to on this video is something that sometimes I find emails about in my inbox and I get questions about in terms of people interested in starting therapy for an eating disorder. And that's around rules that outline therapy. So in some eating disorder therapy settings, there can be rules about what the expectations are for the client. For example, in order to access this treatment, you will be required to eat 3 meals and 3 snacks a day. Or in order to access this type of support, your weight must stay above or below a certain amount, or you must cease to engage in certain eating disorder behaviours. This is, at least from where I'm sitting, absolutely not appropriate. These rules are reinforcing perfectionism and expectation and making it difficult for those experiencing the eating disorder to be honest with us about the experience that they're having. If you were told that you needed to meet certain criteria in order to access a treatment that you wanted or needed, many of us, and I certainly would lie to access that care and support that you so desperately wanted. So we might end up setting up scenarios if we say that in order to access therapy you must eat 3 meals and 3 snacks a day, that the client might say to us, yes, I'm doing that, instead of being honest and giving us the opportunity to help them in that experience. I absolutely appreciate that in some treatment contexts that is the model that is used, and if that's a model that you use, I ask that you think about that critically and think about how you can ensure that you're communicating with the client how that might work for them if they're struggling to meet those expectations. If some of the thoughts that I'm bringing up in the conversation here relate to an experience you've had with a client at some point in the past, I ask that you try and be kind to yourself. If you're still working with that client, perhaps try and make amends, bring the conversation up with them and say, hey, I believe I might have said this to you in the past and I wonder if it came across in this way. That's actually a really brave thing to do, which models something very positive to the clients that you're working with. This is complicated and it's a learning curve for all of us, the clients and the professionals. And that's why I think that to some degree this is an uncomfortable topic to think about. There is a lot here and I could go on for a lot longer, but I'm aware that this is supposed to be bite-sized content, so I'm going to leave it here for today. I would absolutely love to hear some of your thoughts and feedback and ideas about this topic in relation to eating disorder recovery and perfectionism. Until next time, be kind, be curious, be yourself.